All right, hello and welcome everybody to our webinar for November 2023 about building strong relationships between chapter advisors and undergraduate officers. My name is Matt Panzano. I am one of the current directors of chapter development for Delta Upsilon. I've been on staff for a couple months now. Before that, I've been a volunteer for about 13 years with Delta Upsilon. Before I worked at this job, I was actually a high school teacher and I taught high school geography. And now that I work for Delta Upsilon, I get to actually enjoy the geography of traveling all around the country and Canada, visiting brothers and making chapter visits and helping our liaison chapters. So very excited to be here as your host. We also have an amazing guest speaker panel from the Purdue chapter. We have Jacob Ellis, chapter advisor, and Jack Martin, the current president, who actually is no longer the current president, just ended his term, but also he is one of our UGAB chairmen. We have Dr. Jeff Niehaus and Josh Menachetti from Christopher Newport University, and we have Walter Olaf, who is the Central Florida chapter advisor, as well as our Province 3 governor, and Peter Pham, who is the current president for UCF. So very excited to have this amazing guest speaker panel. They have quite a lot of insight as to how to build these relationships between advisors and officers. I know for a lot of you that are here, this may be your first time as a chapter advisor formally. You might have done some informal mentoring before for some of our brothers and members, whether or not you are a member of Delta Upsilon or not. So we're very excited to get their opinions about how they have formed these very solid, strong bonds as we go through. So just speaking outward, this is a very open discussion webinar. So please do not feel like we are just going to talk at you. If you'd like to unmute at any point, please feel free to do so and share your thoughts, your opinions, questions, any barriers you might see as well. When I've been working with chapter advisors and undergraduates, not only just as a member of staff, but also in my time as a volunteer, I've noticed the themes of the relationship tend to be the same over time, right? So communication tends to be the number one aspect that is discussed when I ask both chapter advisors and officers, what would you find to be the greatest strength that you all have, right? Once you've established that communication idea and also strategy that works for both of you, that has to lay the groundwork for everything to come. So for this, advisors that, especially if you are advising for the first time, the most successful advisors that I've seen are the ones that not only know when to help, but also when not to offer a piece of advice, right? So it's that old adage of, am I helping or am I listening, right? A lot of the undergraduate officers simply just want to be heard sometimes. Sometimes they're going to call you, text you their frustrations, because obviously this is a very difficult job. Being any officer position is going to have its challenges, right? And especially with the fact that they are going to be going through school and there's a lot going on in their schedule at all times, right? So sometimes just asking that question, am I helping or am I listening, has really been successful for a lot of chapter advisors I've spoken to. And for officers, if there are any officers that happen to watch this or join us during the call, if you do receive any constructive feedback, know that it is meant to assist and not criticize. I think oftentimes when we're not comfortable or we really know the person as well, we tend to, as humans, take that criticism to be a little, we'll say, skeptical. You may not necessarily get offended by the criticism, but you might then question, well, what is the validity, right? Where's the ethos of this person? Why did they think that they can just tell me what to do, right? So I think just having that idea of, am I helping or am I listening, and constructive feedback really does help with communication. The number two strength is confidence. And I say strength in terms of not everyone is going to be born with instant confidence, right? So as advisors, we have to understand that officers want to see that you're giving them a phone call And it's not all just going to be negative news, right? We want to make sure that we're giving them a phone call or a text and saying, awesome job, fantastic work, right? What you did to educate the new members and what they did for their Cornerstone project as a result of what you did as VP membership education was fantastic, right? And giving them that, positivity with some of the, let's look at how we could have approached this situation differently, right? And advisors at the same time, for the officers that are watching or may join us, this is where advisors do want to know that they're being heard, and you should really try out some of the ideas that they suggest. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the manner of which they told you, right? So one of the topics we'll talk about later is recruitment and how COVID-19 has really changed the whole game for how recruitment works. But at the end of the day, we can all agree that recruitment is a necessity for any chapter to survive, right? So being able to share ideas and adapt old ideas into new ones, I think would also help advisors feel appreciated, because remember, as undergraduate officers, you have to understand that people are giving up their time, they're volunteering their free time away from work and family and kids and all that to help Delta Upsilon. And so we have to show appreciation for the people that do sacrifice that time, which in turn builds their confidence in their ability to succeed as advisors, and vice versa, advisors to officers. We want to make sure that we're building that confidence and that failure is seen as a positive, where we are failing forward. If you want to steal that phrase, feel free to do so, but failing forward, right? Mistakes are made because that's where the greatest learning takes place. And if we're looking at the bronze medal, but it's still very important, that trust aspect, trust has to be earned, right? And so going on what we were just talking about here, failure is part of the process. A lot of times advisors want to jump in and help, and not just help, but just do it for the undergraduates. I've seen this happen many times, and the K-12 teacher in me says, well, that's great, the problem may be solved, but then where was the learning, right? Where was the progress that was made? Because eventually the officer has to be self-sustainable. They have to be able to look at the situation, think to themselves, what would my advisor say? What would I do? How should I handle this? Can I marry both ideas, right? Also having the idea that undergraduates are not kids. And I hear this all the time when advisors say, well, the kids are doing this. They are legally adults, and we need to address that. And I say that not to be mean. I know I am guilty of saying this as well to my own brothers in the Florida chapter. But at the same time, how does that make the undergraduate feel when they're being referred to in sort of a juvenile fashion versus I am an officer, I do have responsibility. Sometimes we have 18, 19-year-olds that are in charge of million-dollar properties and facilities, and we need to be able to respect the fact that a kid would not be able to run that. A young adult can be trained, can be mentored, right? And I think just the little word switch really will help you out. But also with officers, I feel like we have a very strong generation of students, and they're very independent, sometimes because they had to be, but also we have a very strong thought of willpower going on with our current undergraduates. And so we need to embrace that and say, hey, you don't have to do this all by yourself, even though you may instinctually feel like you have to do this by yourself. And this has gone on for decades, if not centuries, of how do I figure this out? But there should be that trust to say, you know what, I can reach out to my advisor. I won't be judged for it because they know that I'm coming to them for help because I do trust them to give me the best advice. It doesn't necessarily mean the undergraduate is going to do everything that the advisor says, just to be clear. But the fact that they can at least call, text, just have a Zoom meeting, something of that nature, or if you're geographically there, just meet up for coffee and say, this is what we can do about the situation. Do not feel like you have to have this whole burden to yourself, right? Before we move on to the next part, I just wanted to throw it out there. This was my largest role in the whole webinar tonight. So I just wanted to give you the best tips and tricks that I've learned from many others tonight. The real focus is going to be on our guest speaker panel. So with that being said, are there any questions before we move on? Questions, comments? Feel free to unmute if you have any. Right. Go ahead on to the next slide here. So this is where I'd like to open up the conversation to our advisors and our undergraduate officers that are here, talking about the life cycle of the undergraduate officer, what that looks like. I'm very glad that we got to do this webinar around this time of year because historically a lot of chapters will have their elections around November, possibly early December, depending on when they do it. Some chapters, like we do have here tonight, follow the academic year versus the calendar year, but this is one of the highest times of transition for our officers. So talking about, and this is for our advisor panel here, how do you start that approach of building a new relationship with a newly elected officer if, let's say, you've never really met them before? And any advisor can open up and share if you'd like to from our guest speaker panel.
Yeah, I'll kick things off. I'll say I think it's really important to establish early contact. So I've been hounding Jack this week as they do elections. Hey, as soon as elections happen, send me all the new officers and all the new contact info. So that way I can tip all of the advisor team to reach out to the officer they mentor ASAP to say congrats and find a time to meet before the end of the year. I think the early contact is super important. It kind of creates this expectation that I am here for you. I expect to meet and have conversations, and then establishing that contact in the spring, or during the end of this fall, allows us to kick off the spring already knowing each other a little bit, when we'll probably find a regular time cadence. And so the other thing that I think is important with those early messages is a lot of what you were saying, Matt, too, earlier, to underscore that the tone that we take within those. Hey, let's be congratulatory in these early stages. Let's learn about them. Let them know that we're here to be a resource. So that way they do look forward to seeing how the relationship develops, and us being a resource when they need us. And then two, also the tone during that call that, like, hey, I do expect us to meet regularly. We will meet regularly throughout your term, whether that's a biweekly cadence or something like that, or weekly, depending on what officer position it is. But that early contact and striking the right tone in those first few weeks of them being a new officer, I think goes a very long way in building the relationship up, or building on top of one that you might have.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think, Jacob, I agree completely, right? Being able to be congratulatory and figuring out who's in the middle of that process and making contacts, early and often, especially during the transitionary period. I try to be more in tune with some of the chapter dynamics, whereas when election season rolls around, I kind of know who's going to be on the ballots. Usually we in the Central Florida chapter elect out of chair positions, or the guys will stay on the executive board for maybe a year or even sometimes two. So I try to build those relationships prior to the election period starting. So at least whenever that time does come, they know who I am. We've had some candid conversations. We have a personal relationship. And then that way now our dynamic changes from I'm just the general chapter advisor and you're a brother, to now I'm the chapter advisor and you're an officer, and we need to work together to get something done. So I agree completely. Transitions is extremely important, but I would challenge all the advisors to try to understand who's kind of the up and coming guys, ask them to express an interest. If you want to be on the executive board, let's have a conversation. During executive board retreats or working days, invite them in and get them involved in the CEP process, and you just make yourself known and available.
Thank you.
And that's for my part. I don't know if this is something that can translate. It might just be a personality thing, but I always feel like, and I always really try to wear it on my sleeve, that I feel privileged to have been invited into the group that is the chapter. And I feel it. It's not something you could really fake. I think it kind of has to be genuine, but I emphasize it. If I show up to a chapter meeting and they welcome me, or they're excited to see me, or sometimes I'll walk in and there's a round of applause. I'm like, oh my God, because that's just amazing. Who among us wouldn't really love to recapture at least some part of what it felt like to be an undergraduate member of a chapter? And I get that. I get little tastes of that every time I get to go to an event, every time I get to be invited to a recruitment event, every time that they're doing something on campus, every time I see one of them on campus and say hi, and every time I go to a chapter meeting. It is a real privilege for me to get to just have some of that juice that is a brotherhood. And I think that the more that they're aware of that, the less tension there's going to be, because they don't feel like they're wasting your time. They don't feel like they're burdening you with their problems. They don't feel like they have to have something in exchange to offer for a conversation that you have. You want it. It's rewarding in and of itself for you as an advisor. And so I think with that attitude, everything else that flows later is going to be a lot easier and a lot better.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that, and this really goes to that top bullet point here. This should be a year-long process. This should not just be the habits of the first couple of weeks of a new officer's position. As advisors, we need to be understanding that the relationship, like anything, takes work and it takes time. And so if we're only investing, we'll say, the first few weeks of a new officer's term to, let's say, make the master calendar, or figure out what's going to be, the educational programming we're going to do for the spring, or how are we going to approach rush week, for example, and then that's it. And then they don't hear from you. That really doesn't build that trust that we were saying earlier, right? Love the perspectives there. I would love to hear from our undergraduates about your perspective, especially when you were new officers coming into the role, and how you built your relationships with your advisors here.
I think I can sort of piggyback off of what Niehaus was saying. For our chapter specifically, I mean, we see him all the time across campus. So we had kind of already developed some semblance of that. But I think, having been elected to the presidency, I think the biggest thing that I can give as advice to, advisors and incoming presidents or officers about, us, I guess, is, I think officers need to understand that, they're here, they want you to succeed as well. They were in that they may have been in that spot in your chapter, and, any sort of feedback or anything they give to you is also for the betterment of the chapter, even if you might, see things in a different way. And I think it's also one thing that I always appreciate about this role is that it does sort of humanize you, and you recognize that you're going to make mistakes. But I think being able to have that relationship with an advisor to where they can sort of coach you through that, and understand that that is the point of an advisor, is them to coach you through these pitfalls that you can have, are going to make you a better officer in your chapter, but also a better leader among the rest of your chapter, and be able to recognize and deal with the situations that do come up. So I think it's ultimately just having sort of an open mind and understanding that ultimately this is all here for your benefit.
Great, thank you.
I can kind of jump in next. So one of the things that I would make sure, especially when it comes to the question on screen about how to receive feedback, feedback is always a good thing. A lot of the stuff that the advisors talked about is really, really good in terms of, speaking directly about how I interact with Jacob, that interaction when he prepares me, it's kind of give me something good, give me something I can work on, give me something good again. Kind of sandwiching that with kind of a carrot, stick, carrot type of phrasing is very helpful. But it's also really important to make sure that the officer knows who they're dealing with. They're not dealing with somebody who's working for IHQ. They're doing, as kind of my predecessor was talking about, they're dealing with somebody who really cares about the chapter. Not very long ago, they were sitting in your shoes. Maybe they were chapter president. Maybe they were a different role, but they want the chapter to succeed, and they're going to do everything they can to help you get to a point where you're being successful as a chapter. And recognizing that and taking everything that they say in with the knowledge that they aren't trying to run your chapter into the ground. They're really just trying to be there, be a voice of reason, kind of help you bounce ideas off of them in order for you to be a more successful, not only leader, but also bring it back to your chapter and help your chapter be more successful as a whole.
Awesome. Well said. Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, completely agree with Jack. So in terms of the question itself, in terms of preparing ourselves to receive feedback, I think it's important for us to come from a humble perspective in the sense of like these advisors, they were chapter presidents or very involved in the chapter in some way before us. And so then there's two sides to it. It's how, it's on the advisor's perspective to come off in a very respectful way. Kind of like what you said, we're not necessarily kids, we're adults as well. But yes, we are younger and we're still learning. So coming off in a way that is supportive, but then also it's how undergrads kind of take what they're saying and take it fully, not just take it as like, oh, this is somebody that's just whatever, they're just kind of talking and we don't really want to listen. You should take it in a very respectful and a very way that's like they know more than me. They've been through exactly what I've been through. And then to talk about our relationship. So Walter kind of talked a little bit about it. It's exactly right. He went up to me before I was president at all, and he created that relationship. And so then that trust was already there. He's a big reason why I even wanted to become president, because he instilled that trust within me, and then I entrusted him right after that. And so right off the bat, we had that trust, we had that personal relationship along with the work relationship of the chapter and advisor. We just had a personal relationship of like someone that I could just talk to. I see him as a mentor, and I see him as someone that I can go to about anything, not just with stuff about DU, but in my life in general. And so I appreciate Walter for creating that relationship with me right off the bat. And that just made our work relationship so much easier and so much better. By just creating that personal relationship first.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter, very much. And I think that's a very astute point to make, that once you've almost this point of success is measured once you've finished your officer cycle as an undergraduate, are you still going to that person as your mentor? And I feel like if we're using that as one of the measures of that successful relationship, that is a wonderful reflection of that bond that was built. So thank you for saying that. That's a great point. Just so everyone knows too, we are definitely going to have time for questions at the very end. So as we're going through some of these, if you'd like to unmute and if you'd like to, comments on there, that's totally fine. If you do have any questions, let's go ahead, and we do want to save those and value your time as well. But we'll address those at the end too. So we'll go ahead and thank you all for sharing your thoughts there.
Matt, it's Frank Centofanti. I had a couple of comments as well I'd like to share.
Go ahead, Frank.
So I'm a graduate of Purdue, 88 alum, and I'm advising the Loyola Marymount chapter in Westchester, California. So kind of going back to, kicking off a good relationship and, the communication, I think it's really important for a chapter or a colony, associate chapter to see the advisor at events. And the more that the advisor shows up, I think the more credibility the advisor has. And I think just by example, just by being there, the undergrads can see, hey, this advisor really cares. This is advisors taking time out of their day to be here at this particular event. And I think that that helps improve the communication. I have a standing call every other Friday at 11 a.m. with my undergraduate officer. And I think as an advisor, you shouldn't do it for them, but you should just give them guidance and a framework. You should. I try to impart like just a little gem of wisdom, I guess you'd say, just to maybe an example of what happened when I was in the chapter, or an example of, okay, what you're going to be doing in the chapter is going to help you after college. And I've mentioned a couple of times to my undergraduate officer that there's things that you're going to learn by being in the fraternity, by being in DU and running the chapter, either an officership or a committee person. There's things that you're going to learn there that you're not going to learn in the classroom. And that's all part of a more well-rounded college experience. Anyway, I think, really by showing up to as many events as you can as an advisor goes a long way in forging that relationship.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you very much, Frank, for sharing that. And I had the pleasure of meeting Frank in person when he showed up to one of the final Rush Week events for LMU. So thank you very much for showing up as well. I do want to move on to our next part because I feel like people will be very eager to hear from our undergraduates in what we call Generation Z. I wanted to bring up this segment because I have seen some of the webinars that other organizations have done in the past, and it started off with a study of the generation without actually asking the generation what they think. So it was almost like this anthropological study of Generation Z or millennials or Gen X or whatever generation you want to say. So I figured we have three fantastic undergraduates here. And so when we're approaching this idea of Generation Z, the reason I wanted to bring it up, when I've been talking with new chapter advisors and recruiting new chapter advisors, one of the barriers that has come up in their mind is this generational gap. And I think you would be surprised to hear some of the thoughts of our undergraduates and how they see this viewpoint of, well, generational gaps, maybe not. Right. So undergraduates, whoever would like to jump in.
Yeah, I can get things started here. I think with Generation Z, I think there isn't too much of a huge glaring difference between Generation Z and the generations before it. I think the biggest one is probably just the technology difference. I mean, I think we've grown up around technology like our entire lives. Like the iPhone came out when I was in like the 3rd grade, so I've had it pretty much the entire time I've been alive. So I think in terms of communication, I think some people are more receptive to the text message maybe than the phone call. That might work more. But I don't think there's anything too intrinsically different in terms of whether or not how to interact with a person that's a member of Gen Z as opposed to a millennial or whatnot. I think we're all very driven. We're all very independent, as Matt pointed out. I think that's one thing that's very common. We like to get things done ourselves. So I think it's one thing to maybe do is sort of feed that drive and feed that when we're interacting with the undergraduate officer, because a lot of times they'll probably reciprocate that back to you and how they interact with you. So that's all I would say. But I think that's there's a lot of the same things that Generation Z has in common, I think, with other generations, as opposed to huge differences.
one of the things that I'll bring up is, like Josh said, there's a lot of drive in those of us that have chosen to kind of pick up the reins and lead, but kind of the whole 20-80 thing where 20% of people do 80% of the work. I feel like, at least in my chapter and talking for some of the other chapter leaders, that's kind of shifted. And it's not really shifted in the way that we'd like. It's kind of gone maybe to like 15% of people are doing 85% of the work. Sometimes I feel like in my chapter it's like pulling teeth, just trying to get guys to do the simplest stuff. I don't think it's really that the whole generation has become apathetic. I really don't think that's true. But it definitely is a little bit harder to get guys to kind of step up and do things. I feel like where we're trying to even get guys to feel like social rules. So it's not just like they don't want to do CEP, they don't want to do X, Y, and Z that we have to do for chapter stability. It's even stuff as simple as like planning a social event or planning a philanthropy event. So it's not necessarily a huge issue. Again, it's only that 5% swing towards a 1585, but the people that you're getting are great people that you're working with that are very driven, as Josh had said. Just know that they're compensating for maybe an additional 5% of people that aren't really as driven and really aren't as interested in contributing outside of a general membership type beat.
Then for me, I think when talking about different generations, even talking about generations between like Gen Z and like millennials, like we're right next to each other, and yet it seems like we have almost like a different language where we have different experiences, and so then we find different things entertaining. We have different enjoyments, and we just in general just have a different energy about things. So I think it's important when translating advice and things that you want to explain to the newer generation of Gen Z and people, the new officers that are coming in, to kind of almost formulate in a way of like, especially when it comes to the chapter, the idea that worked for during your time, like what effective strategy you use, but more like the basis of it rather than exactly what you did and to recreate the same thing. It's a little bit on our generation as well to kind of see the advice more like by what the intention is of like, oh, in terms of recruiting, the idea to make people feel welcome, to make people feel like they want to join your chapter. That's the base idea that works, but then different strategies and how to do that might be different. And so then a little bit on the advisor to kind of figure out how to communicate that without, coming off in a way that's like, oh, just do exactly what we did. It worked for us. What's the problem? But then also a little bit on our generation as well, just take it as, oh, he's not, just coming off in a way that's saying exactly what he did, but to come off more of like, oh, that's what worked for them. But the main idea still works because people are people at the end of the day. The main ideas are there. It's just how exactly do we translate it to our generation? Because I think it's a big difference in terms of like this generation now goes to college and then joins a fraternity, rather going to college, already knowing to join a fraternity, going to college for the fraternity. And so I think there is just a little bit of difference, but at the end of the day, generations are all the same. It's just different small things here and there. The small details are slightly different. So finding that way to bridge the gap and translating that to each other to effectively communicate a little bit better.
Yeah, and you can. I'm sorry, Matt. Please.
No, I love it. I love it all.
And you can give a sense of continuity, I guess, a sense of comfort to undergraduates when you let them know that the problems they're experiencing are, of course, unique. Of course, it's the first time it's happened to them, but they're probably very much the same as things that have been happening for generations and decades, and that we've survived these time and time again. I every time I go to a chapter meeting and every time that there's a discussion, every time that there are two sides to an argument, most of the time when it gets really kind of heated, it's because there is a new member and half the people are like, no, they're okay. We need the people, forgive them. They can get better. And the other half is saying, this person isn't good enough for us. This person doesn't meet our ideals. We have to be selective or else we'll just let anybody in. It's really important to me. It's important to my identity. That is the exact same fight discussion that we had in 1994, 95, 96. Everybody worries that their membership is dwindling and that it's going to mean the death of their chapter. That anxiety sits with all of us, especially on kind of off years, some years more than others. And then you have interpersonal conflicts between people over dating relationships, or just somebody's not respecting me. And then it becomes a thing where people will try to gather their allies, and they'll try to gather their allies within the chapter. And suddenly there's a large inter-chapter conflict between groups. But that's not the first time that's ever happened. It's not the 100th time it's ever happened. And so despite the kind of superficial differences of how we communicate, we're still communicating the same things. We still are worried about the same things. We're still having the same arguments. We're still having, and it's good to be able to be an advisor, watch that happen and go, yeah, I remember that. It's going to be okay, guys. It's going to be okay. You know, work through it. Everybody gets their say. I don't know what the solution is going to be, but it's going to be okay. And then one example here of like something that we did as a chapter, which is not going to be the same solution, but the general idea could work, is that when we were recruiting, because we really had to recruit hard to fill this new house, we brainstormed with our advisor and came up with the idea that at the Interfraternity Council fair, the fraternity information fair, I don't know if this is cool or not, but we had a limousine that pulled up to the student union where they were having the fair. And when we had somebody at our table who was interested in the house, didn't really know, we said, you know what? Why don't you just go ahead and see the house right now? We've got a limo out front. And we take people from the information fair up to the house, walk them around, say, hey, you know, have a little just basically rush event right there, and then take them back to the fair in the limo. We may not get to do that exactly, but stand out, do something different, make a splash when everything else looks homogenous, get attention. That could be the idea behind a strategy that can be implemented anywhere if you're just creative enough. So I think a lot of the problems are the same. And if you want to talk to somebody in Gen Z, listen. I like, Matt, on the very first slide, it was, are you listening or are you helping? I have a therapeutic background. A lot of times I feel like my listening is the helping. And so if you're listening to them, if you're listening to what they want to tell you, they'll figure out a way to communicate with you, and you'll figure out a way to communicate with them. It is still modern English, and they'll back off on the slang if they want you to understand it, and you'll back off the slang if you don't want to say groovy a lot. But you know, since we have a common purpose, we usually find a way to communicate.
Yeah,
that was
Jeff, I want to echo what you said, and I think you're right. This is not the first time that they've seen something. It's not the 100th time, and maybe it's the 100th time for your chapter, but across all of DU over the almost 200 some years that we've been involved, it's certainly not the first time. So and it's funny. It's like I always kind of relate it to basketball, where the game of basketball has shifted, but the fundamentals are still the same, right? You still got to defend, you still got to dribble, you still have to shoot, and yeah, there's new wrinkles that are put in, there's new technologies in place. But I can point out that, hey, there's a guy in our chapter, JD. I know exactly who the JD of my generation was. I know exactly who the Migo of my generation was. And I see these guys and they're repeating people, right? And so knowing how to interact with those is very common, but the stresses are still the same, right? Their seniors are looking for their jobs after graduation and being able to relate to them in that front. The guys are looking for internships. What classes do I take? Do I change my major? These things, I don't care what technology and what AI is doing, and if we have self-driving cars or not, they're still going to be the same, right? And so finding those commonalities to relate with Generation Z, and I got to give it to them, they're more willing to try something new than at least my chapter was when, and we were all millennials at the time. So I think they're a lot more, hey, let's try something. Let's see if there's a more efficient way to do things, which I think can only be leveraged to their advantage.
Fantastic. Jacob, did you want to add anything?
No, I think things are good. I think everyone gave some really good points there, and I really like what Peter said as well, right? Like, how do we toe the line of bringing in something tangible, but also leaving that flexibility, not being married to our moment. So that way they can kind of figure out their own solutions there.
Love it. I want to value everybody's time. So the last part of our webinar here, I actually wanted our duos that I've recruited to join us here give you a real live time authentic scenario analysis. And we had a pre-meeting before this where I told them sort of the basic topics of what these case study scenarios would be on. But I wanted to, especially if you're a new advisor, I wanted to show you what the result can look like when you do have that strong bond and a situation arises that you have to work together as a team to solve. So again, the scenarios that you are about to see, they're 100% real. I've encountered them in my time on staff, but our guest speakers have never seen or read these before. And that's why I wanted to give you that authentic reaction that they're going to have. So really the questions that we can think about, these aren't all going to be hit every case study, but how should, if you're an advisor, how should you respond to that situation if you're trying to advise an officer about who to collaborate with and how to collaborate with them? You know, what audiences, what lenses are we viewing this situation from, whether it be the alumni board, the advisory board, maybe the housing corporation, if there's a house involved, right? What information should they be sharing or trying to get help from me as a chapter liaison or anyone else on staff at IHQ? And then if we're looking back, were there action plans or steps that we could have taken to avoid the situation entirely? You know, maybe that could be the lesson that we learn here. So we're going to jump into it, and I'm excited to see what our duos come up with here. All right. So case study number 1. So the chapter has been slowly accruing debt over the past few years. The newly elected VP Finance knows that the chapter has historically collected dues late into the semester and that some guys do not pay but are still allowed to attend all social events. He and the new president hope to change this pattern by instituting a new policy to collect dues or establish payment plans during the first week of each semester and avoid gaining any more debt. When the two officers propose their plan at the next chapter meeting, they are met with resistance by their fellow members. Several of the senior members exclaim that they would have had to drop out of DU in the past if they had to pay dues that soon in the semester. A few others mention that they have to depend on financial aid to afford the fraternity and that the new plan simply will not work. So let's see. How do we approach this situation? Let's go with Christopher Newport duo, Josh and Jeff. How would you approach this situation?
Well, I think the first thing to do is obviously to make sure Jeff is aware that we are accruing debt. I think that's step number 1. Inform, communicate, and let everybody know what is going on. I think another thing that, might help prevent maybe the sort of chapter chaos that sometimes can happen when you propose something new, is not only go over it with your executive board, but use an e-house and use your advisor as maybe a sounding board. Is, hey, does this sound good? Does this sound like a reasonable plan that you would, if you were in this, in our chapter shoes, reasonably accept? So it's going through that motion of that. And then, just using the advice of your advisor to figure out how to either prevent the situation from happening, that is, or how to navigate it. And I think if we had a conversation, I think from this specific issue, I would say, it's with our chapter size, it's very easy to be able to meet with individual members and work out a sort of payment plan with them. And okay, if you have financial aid, if you aren't going to be able to pay at that first week of the semester number of money, what can you reasonably do right now? What can you do in the future? What's a realistic expectation look like for you? So that it's not, you're respectful of their situation, but you're also still collecting the dues. You're putting them on a plan of being able to pay that off.
Yeah, well, I'd say if I sat down with either Chetty or Drew Bogan, our finance officer, and they brought it to me, first off, I would probably already know. My name is on the bank account. I get the emails from my HQ saying what your balance is. Funny enough, I get the emails from Purdue because they think I'm with Purdue, and I get these emails that give me this huge number for each chapter, and it flips me out. But that's fine. No, I think that it would be really important to take it kind of slowly, especially if there's already friction in the chapter. And one of the things that's really important to remember is that there's seriously, it's incredibly rare that there are any bad actors in the discussion. Everybody's approaching it from their own point of view, but everybody wants to see the fraternity do well. It's part of everybody's identity. And so it really is not going to serve anyone to be accusatory or negative or otherwise say that somebody isn't caring or is being completely stupid or irrational or unreasonable. That everybody's got their struggles, everybody's got their reasons. But of course, yeah, just like Josh said, the thing to do would be to say, okay, I want to make sure that you heard all parts of the plan. For those of you who have their money strung out over the course of a semester, part 2 here was talking about just establishing a plan. It doesn't mean that everybody has to pay up right away, but if you are according to that plan, then you are good. You are in the black with us. You are fine. But you just have to establish that and make sure that you stick with it. And by the way, as long as we are on this topic, a great way to float the chapter in a way that's more sustainable is to have a more active and thriving alumni contact network. Because I've talked to alumni who would love to hear from an undergrad, and if they had a 20-minute conversation with somebody over the phone, they literally told me they'd cut a check. Okay, well, we don't really have a system in place for making those contacts, for making those kind of calls. Let's take this opportunity, now that everybody is having a hard time paying dues, to establish a more vivacious alumni contact network so that we can start having some kind of rolling support from the people that have come before us. So it's also an opportunity to look at what we could do in the future to keep it from happening again.
Love it. And honestly, I think you two provided a fantastic analysis. Ooh, I clicked a little too soon there. Fantastic analysis, and also in real time, understanding that, both of these men just approach this situation with the exact same candor that they would any other situation, right? And that's the level of trust that we want to try to build with those officers, to where any situation can be approached with a level head. Even if it's sort of an in the moment type of situation, we can still take that pause, that breath, and reflect on it, right? In the interest of time, I am just going to move to the next one, but thank you both very much. Awesome job. I knew this was a great idea, and you guys nailed it. Fantastic. All right. So case study number 2, we're going to give you the overarching theme of recruitment, and since that has come up a lot, so this one, the chapter was reorganized about a year ago, leaving only 12 members remaining. For those of you that don't know, reorganization means that membership review was conducted and many of the members were either let go or just they chose to leave on their own accord, right? So the vice president recruitment and president are feeling a lot of the pressure from both alumni and fellow undergraduates to ensure that this fall semester rush week gains a lot of new associate members. The VP recruitment became an associate member right after the reorganization and was elected as a freshman right after he was initiated last fall. The president is a sophomore and is not very confident that the older members will listen to him. So that age gap again, right? Though he is confident in his abilities to plan the events, the VP of recruitment has only given a few bids in the past and does not know how to train other members to do so. The House Corporation president has said that if the undergraduates cannot recruit enough new members this fall, they will shut down the facility to save money. Morale is already low after not recruiting many associate members in the spring, and many of the older brothers lack the motivation to recruit anymore. So lots of stuff packed in there. But Walter and Peter, I feel like you guys for recruitment from Central Florida, what do you got for us?
Yeah, so like you said, this case study definitely has a lot of things going on. I think the first thing to kind of look at to tackle is like the motivation of the whole chapter. It's important that it's not just the VP of recruitment that's doing recruiting, it's the whole chapter that's behind him that does the recruiting with him. And I think everyone needs to understand after reorganization that like this is it. Like we have to get something going or we're not a chapter at all anymore. And so then I think sitting down and talking to this chapter about, hey guys, listen, we all chose to be here. We all chose to stay after reorganization, after our other brothers were let go, or other brothers had to leave on their own. And we decided to stay for a reason. And we can't just lay down and give up here. All right, let's look at it and let's solve this problem. And the biggest problem, like this case study says, is recruitment. And so then when it comes down to the actual recruiting, I mean, everyone says it, everyone preaches about it, but you actually have to live by the fact that recruitment is 365 days a year. And so even before the fall has started, yes, spring may have not gone the way that you wanted it to, but the summer coming into that fall, even already right after the spring rush week and whatever happened during that, maybe things didn't go great. You have to start looking already to the next fall. And so then you need to start, VP recruitment has to push along with the president, the entire chapter, to go meet people, go out to join other things on campus other than this fraternity. And then the more that you spread out yourself across campus, the more you're going to meet people. And naturally, the more likable you are, and the more people you meet, the more you're going to recruit yourself. And so then as the whole chapter is doing that, even if it's a small chapter, you're going to grow in size. If 12 members bring 3 guys, that's 36 guys in your new associate member class, even if it's a small, even if you started as a small chapter. And so, yes, there are pressures going on, but I think if the president and VP of recruitment talks to this chapter and the chapter is then motivated, that pressure honestly releases once you feel like you have the chapter's support behind your back. And so I think that is, and obviously, going to your advisor first is the most important thing because he's going to have recommendations for you as well. The advisor, maybe his chapter didn't go through a reorg, but I'm sure people in the past he's talked to has gone through a reorganization. He's seen it, maybe in other chapters as well. And so he's going to know how to best support you and give you different strategies on what to do. And so then once you come back to the chapter with those strategies and everyone is on the same page, you go out, you recruit, you do the best you can. And then whatever happens, you're doing it together. And as long as you're doing it together, things will happen and things will be great. That's the way I see it. Walter, what about you?
So from an advisor perspective, this is one of those watershed moments where, in my opinion, you have to be a little bit more hands-on. I think at the end of the day, sometimes we in society really put a lot of pressure on these fraternity young men that are 18 and 22 years old. And for me to just say, you need to fix this because obviously you need guys to have a chapter, go figure it out is unacceptable as the point of advisor, but also as their brother. We had the challenge coming into the semester that we were running around 50 some guys. The average chapter size at UCF is around in the mid 70s. And we all know that things are getting more expensive. The loss prevention bill is continuing to go up. And unless you want to keep jacking up the price of dues, and there is a price point that is going to be respective to everyone's college campus, you need the volume, you need guys, right? It's a mathematical problem at that point. So to sit down the guys and have a very pragmatic conversation saying, dues are either going to be $1,000 a semester to maintain our current lifestyle, or we have to get, up to a certain number and we can actually lower dues. So there's your option. It's up to you, right? But what are you going to choose? And of course, everyone says, well, then we have to recruit more guys. At that point, we move into the resource phase. So what, as an advisor, can I provide from resources to our undergraduate leadership and to the chapter? So we brought in our expert recruiters, Chris Korn being one of them, Jesse Rowe being another. These guys have done phenomenal in UCF's history in recruiting. So we did the whole thing, right? What is the ideal DU man? where do you find these guys? What conversations do you have? What are the logistics? You know, it's not herding cats at a recruitment event. There is a ballet, so to speak. So how do we get in that process? And we had a whole day of just recruitment training right before the recruitment kickoff. And then we have a little bit of a chapter powwow saying, again, reminding this is of the benefit. If we double the size of this fraternity, what more can you do? How can we compete on campus? How can we go head to head with this organization? What events could we win? What competitions could we win? What can we do with more money while paying less dues? And that just motivates the guys. And then, of course, now I'm going to step in. I'm going to be, again, a little bit more hands-on, and I'm going to challenge the guys, because traditionally we were recruiting about 25 guys, saying, look, we got to get to 40, which means you have to get about 55 bids to get 40 all the way through. And every day I was asking, what's the count? What's the number? You should be at this point. And telling these guys, what more can I provide you from a resource perspective? And for some of them, I had mothers calling me on the phone because little Johnny, who's a potential new member, their mother is scared that because they've heard all the negative things of fraternity. So me, as the quote unquote adult, is having conversations with parents and saying what fraternity can do for these young men, and what we're going to do for their son. And so having those conversations is extremely important. I had about 3 or 4 of those this past semester, but continuing to challenge the guys and sometimes making them rise to a higher set of expectations that they didn't really know possible. And clearly they blew it out of the water. And I'm very excited because this Sunday we're initiating our guys, and this next year is going to be phenomenal for us because we have the volume, we have the numbers, and it's only smooth sailing going forward.
I'd like to jump in real quick. Sorry. I'm going to jump in real quick to talk about one small problem that in the case study, actually. So the sentence that I was looking at was the fact that the VP of recruitment was elected as a freshman, and then the president as a sophomore. He's not very confident the older members will listen to him. I think I can actually sympathize with that a little bit because I was elected president my second semester after I joined the fraternity. First semester, as a newer member, I was elected as the VP of administration. So right off the bat, I was immediately hungry, and I wanted to be on the exec board, and I was lucky enough to be elected. But then it is true, there are times where there are older members that kind of just say, oh, that's not how we do things, or that's not how way things have done in the past. So why are you trying to, all of a sudden do something, or why do you think you know more than us? And it's definitely a difficult situation to tackle, because you want to be respectful to the people that have been there, that recruited you. But at the same time, how things need to go, and you need them to be motivated as well. So it's kind of finding that balance of like, yes, I respect you. You have been here longer than I have, but at the same time, we have different ideas, we have different experiences. Why don't we just come together and, come up with a great idea to make this fraternity better? And not only that, I think it's also the fact that I think a lot of people get imposter syndrome sometimes, and they kind of think, am I even fit for this role? And I think it's important to remind yourself as like president, or however young you are, that you were elected for a reason. You are here in this position for a good reason. It's because your other brothers had confidence in you to lead this chapter, and so go lead it. And so then if you have some pushback, yes, work with that pushback, listen to them, be genuine, but at the same time, understand that you have ideas as well. And I think it's important for the advisor to kind of instill that confidence as well in the president. Walter, did really good with me on that, saying, hey, you are a great guy, and you were elected for a reason. Don't ever, feel like you're in the wrong position here. And so I think it's important for advisors to constantly remind their president and their VP of recruitment, whatever, their exec board, however young they are, that they are here for a reason. They were elected for this position, and to go out and do what they were elected to do, which whatever role that may be. But I think it's important to keep reminding yourself that as an officer, but the advisor to remind them as well.
I love this, and I'm going to be honest. Wow, I'm motivated. I would hire both of you as motivational coaches, guys. This is great. And speaking to that point, so I love the response there. And remember, the whole main idea of why we're doing the case study is just to show you how that bonds between an advisor and an officer that has existed between these three duos is really solidified, so that you hear them going back and forth off of each other's ideas. This is exactly the ideal situation, right? From both Christopher Newport and Central Florida. I do have to put a little bit of pressure on our Purdue guys because you guys are last. And I am also very respectful of your time and everyone else's time. I appreciate everyone that's being here. We just have one other case study that I wanted to go over. And this one, I think if you have a facility, it will definitely apply for your chapter or associate chapter, or just use the term accountability as the full term here. So very quickly, the chapter has recently transitioned to substance-free housing. In preparation for the policy change, the chapter's alumni have funded extensive renovations to the old party room in order to repurpose it into a functional space. The space now features brand new couches, 2 large TVs mounted on the wall, 3 poker-style tables, and lots of sports memorabilia. The guys love the new look of the space and are excited to use it for recruitment to watch big games, play cards, and relax. 2 weeks into the semester, several senior out-of-house members returned from a night at the bars downtown, bringing with them several cases of beer and a few handles of liquor. They proceed to the new space in the house, the former party room, and end up breaking a few sports memorabilia items and damage one of the poker tables, along with spilling alcohol on the floor and the couches. The sophomore chapter president and house manager are at the house and attempt to address the situation, but are met with threats and yells from the senior as they proclaim, "Do not F with our party room." Very real scenario. So from Purdue, Jacob and Jack, go for it.
So as a chapter that recently transitioned to substance-free housing and revamped the party room into a room with TVs and sports memorabilia, this is a scenario that we've not had exactly, but we've had similar situations. We've had situations that resemble it. So in this situation, the biggest thing before you even, well, we'll jump into the advisor stuff. At the present moment, you got to just diffuse the situation, get everyone to go home. When it comes to the interaction with the advisor, though, it's really trying to get the question out there of what is this room supposed to look like? I know this is supposed to be this room for this, but clearly there's some guys that still think this is what this is for. And the whole point of substance-free housing is to kind of transition away from this kind of stuff happening. Damage to the house. I mean, spilling alcohol on the floor can get cleaned up, obviously, but the loss of property is something that kind of comes with the non-substance-free housing nature. I mean, Jacob, the way that I would want to go about this is trying to figure out what we can do to kind of discipline these seniors in order to kind of help them understand the fact that what they're doing is the old way. And with new people coming in, with a new executive board, a new house manager, it's kind of the new direction that the fraternity is going to take. And I would want to communicate. This is where kind of what I said earlier comes into play so substantially. Is my advisor is not with IHQ. Obviously, this breaks substance-free housing. I know that if I talk to Jacob about this, he's not going to go run into IHQ trying to get us thrown on probation or in trouble with headquarters. He's going to try to help me solve this issue. That being said, if I come to you, Jacob, with, "Hey, we're going to go through our judicial processes. What experiences have you had in the past with this situation, with seniors kind of not respecting the authority of the chapter president? What would you have told me in that situation?"
Yeah, I think this is it's a fun example because, right, like the situation the night, I think you described perfectly, right? Like, yeah, you do your best to defuse the thing in the moment, but then you have to think of like, how do cooler heads prevail the next couple days, and how do you guys make sure that any situation that comes up is addressed appropriately? I think your thoughts on like the self-governance piece, like letting you guys handle this through the J board procedures is appropriate. But we would be having that debrief conversation of like, how do we make sure that we find a way to engage these guys in a meaningful way if they're willing to be engaged. If they're not willing to be engaged, then we might have to have a more serious conversation about, their role within the chapter, their membership, things like that. But assuming that they participate with the normal self-governance process of the chapter, I'd be asking us, hey, how are we communicating this both with the men and with the chapter to let them understand this isn't okay, right? Like, we need to have consistent messaging kind of across the board. I think something that I've heard said from some folks at the IHQ level that like I like to repeat because it makes sense to me is like, like substance-free housing doesn't mean that people can't like drink. It just means that the house is no longer the bar, right? So how do we find these other alternatives and opportunities, right? We make sure that the chapter knows there's these clear distinctions between what we use the house for and what we use other spaces for. I think too, I try and coach through like, have us envision, how do we think those J board meetings are going to go? How do we think notifying the guys that they're going to be going to J board, right? Like, how do we notify them? And then thinking of the range of outcomes there, right? Like, if they respond positively, we're working them through plan A. We hope that they opt in for the most part, and things go smooth. But if they don't go smooth, what do we fall to on plan B? I think at the end of the day, on some of the substance-free housing stuff, we're not looking for the chapter to be like, it's not black and white, and that like the chapter is either perfect or they're gone, right? It's that, hey, if a mistake happens, I expect us to address it appropriately and move forward. And if that means that the alumni need to be the backstop, right? Like, if the undergraduates won't engage in the conversation, they won't go through the J board process, right? The senior members, they won't respect the officers. Okay, do we need to, pull in the alumni team from the top rope to have some of these conversations and see, what's our ultimate high-end escalation to just communicate broad picture long-term with the chapter. Hey, these actions weren't okay, right? This is plan A. This is how we follow through with these. And ultimately, if folks don't comply or don't want to opt into this experience, this is what probably ends up happening. And then everything always comes back to recruitment, right? So we start to think about, hey, this is what happened, right? What was these guys' mindset towards what the chapter should be? How do we make sure that we're messaging clear expectations for new recruits in future years so these problems don't replicate themselves over time, right? Like, eventually we'll post more on this and look 2 years ahead. Zach, was there anything I missed there as far as guidance that you'd be looking for, or anything like that?
No, it's really just the affirmation that at the end of the day, we'd like to solve this internally, and that I'll do my best to kind of lead that in the house. But starting that communication with you and the alumni corporation of, if we can't, because clearly the alumni corporation is the one losing money as well. It's not just us as undergraduates that are impacted by this, but just making sure that the communication is there, that if something doesn't happen at the undergraduate level, or the right decision, will say, isn't being reached, that you're aware of the situation, that we can kind of move swiftly to make sure that nothing else is broken in the house by some guys that may be a little bit more upset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Jack, a couple things I think I'll add to, like, I've seen scenarios similar to this where, right, like, sometimes the coaching that J board needs is like, how do we make sure that what they're learning during the J board hearing and what they're considering when it comes to sanctions or outcomes actually fits what was happening, right? So with destruction of property, right, like, payment or honoring of the space to help, reconcile that is always a good piece. But then two, understanding these guys' mindsets towards the social outlet and different things, right? Like, maybe we find a way to allow them to earn some of that back, or contribute in a positive way, right? So trying to coach the guys through, figure out some good questions, figure out some good mindsets so the outcomes that we reach are positive, and whatnot there. There was another thing that was on my mind, but I forget. So I'll turn it over.
Yeah.
Well, it's a lot of wisdom has been imparted already here. So, and I really appreciate you guys analyzing that from different points of view and asking those questions back and forth. Hey, Jacob, how would you have advised me in this situation? Hey, Jack, was there anything I missed? Those are perfect examples of that symbiosis that we're looking for in these strong relationships. I really appreciate all of the guest speakers for their input here. I am just going to go ahead and move us into the wrap up because I do value everyone's time and I want to make sure that we can, address any questions as well. Knowing your resources other than, if you're a first-time chapter advisor or, if you're watching this newly elected officer, please know that there are people on staff, myself included. Most of us are going to be a chapter liaison. Every single chapter and associate chapter has a liaison from the staff that if you're sort of out of your element, you don't really know what to do there, please feel free to reach out to us. It is our full-time job. We are here to help you, right? So, and understanding too that we want to build that trust with you. We want to have those open conversations. If you do have an incident that needs to be reported and you don't know how to file an incident report, I can help you with that. Any of your chapter liaisons can help you with that, so you're not alone in this. Obviously, the fraternity and sorority office on campus, other chapter advisors from different chapters that you may know of, or maybe you're an alumnus from, right? And there are plenty of advisors that we have that are not members of Delta Upsilon, and sometimes it's great to have that outside point of view instead of the internal point of view. So with that being said, we'll just leave it open to the floor for questions. I know some people had to leave a little bit early, but are there any questions from any of our guests or any final comments?
It's Frank. Yeah, I just one comment. Something that I mentioned to my undergraduate officer was that whenever you are coming up with a plan that you're going to try to present to the chapter, in essence, you're making a sale. So you have to kind of be prepared and how you're presenting the plan, and also be prepared for some objections that might come up. And you'd have to kind of, I was suggesting that, just try to see if you can brainstorm some objections that you think you might get, just so that that if you get those, that you're prepared, you know what to come back with. There's a lot of chatter that goes on. If someone gets wind of your plan, it's going to run through the chapter house like wildfire. And so you better be pretty prepared. Keep your ear to the ground and just be prepared for objections that you might get. Just try to, explain to them what needs to be done. Like how does recruitment affect the budget? And all of that, how all of that ties in. So and hopefully the membership will understand that it's not just something that you're pulling out of thin air, that there's a reason behind the plan.
Absolutely. Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much. Very insightful there. All right, any other questions here?
Say, Jack, just real curious, what room are you in?
I'm in 4.
4 downstairs. Okay, all right. Just had to know. Thank you.
For sure.
I do want to take a moment to thank our guest speaker panel very much, our 3 undergraduate presidents and our 3 chapter advisors. Thank you so much for being here. I greatly appreciate your time. You've been with me specifically for almost 3 hours now, so I greatly appreciate the fact that we were able to meet up, have this discussion. I think you provided some insanely valuable insight to our future chapter advisors and our future officers as well. So thank you very much. For all of our guests that joined us, thank you for sticking with us the whole time. Appreciate that very much. You will be able to find this recording on our Delta Upsilon YouTube media page if you are a subscriber to that. And if you do have any questions at any point, please feel free to reach out to me directly at IHQ, and I would be more than happy to assist you. So thank you again very much, guys. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen now.